Welcome to North American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with an inspirational author, photographer, and publisher who spent over 30 years bringing remarkable stories to life. His company, Octane Press, publishes award-winning illustrated and narrative books, having collaborated with renowned brands like Case IH, Ferrari, and Caterpillar. With more than 200 books published, 30 independent book awards, and over 1 million readers, Octane Press continues to leave its mark. Today, I'll be discussing his latest upcoming release, Snoopy and the Spy, which chronicles the battle between agriculture equipment makers John Deere and International Harvester in the depths of the farm crisis. From Austin, Texas, I'd like to welcome Lee Klancher. Welcome, Lee, and thank you so much for returning to the show.
Oh, great to be back, Chrissy. I always enjoy this.
So I personally have many of your gorgeous books, and they tell these stories of some of the most cherished farm equipment that span back through generations and generations. Red tractors, red four-wheel drive tractors, red combines. And I also had you on What Color Is Your Tractor podcast when you released Farm All Century last year, I think that was. But now, as I said, you've just released Snoopy and the Spy. So tell me about this new book.
Absolutely. Well, it's really interesting you talk about the stories because when I did this book, I knew what I wanted to do was just tell more of a story. The other books, they're big, they're thorough. If what you love is Farm All or Case IH or John Deere, any of those machines, those books are for you. And there is a lot of stories in there. That is something I've always done. But they're big and they're thorough and they're everything you ever need to know. With this book, I looked and I thought, I just want to go back to the reason I got into this business, what I learned to do in the early days, which is tell a narrative nonfiction story. And it's a story that's engaging and that's fun, that's interesting. So I took a look at all the work I'd done over the years and realized that the era, that late 1970s to early 1980s, was just such an incredible, dramatic time. And that we had in our archives at Octane Press from this time a lot of stories about the time, particularly from a man named Bud Ewell. And Bud Ewell was a sales executive for International Harvester, very colorful man, wonderful storyteller, and a real force of nature. And we realized in this time period what he was doing to try and sell tractors, to push things forward, was just this wonderful human story at a time when people are struggling. And here's this man, he's a former ex-Marine or a former Marine, and his whole attitude toward life is charge up that hill, right? And his company, Harvester at this time, was just facing really, really difficult winds. And going back into the time, you would see how difficult it was. I was looking at newspapers and you could, every couple of weeks, there was a headline. If you loved this brand, if you were farming, if you were working for them, it was another disaster every week. And yet, Mr. Ewell is charging up and doing everything he can to survive. And I just felt like that was a really powerful place to start. We're all going to face tough times. And do you want to lay down or do you want to charge up the hill?
Right. Yeah. And so this is based in the 1980s for background.
Yeah.
And can you lay out kind of the basis of the story
Yes.
between John Deere and International Harvester at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because there's so many things coming together. So you have to look at Harvester and Deere historically, right? You go back to 1902, International Harvester forms, and they are the biggest in the industry by a massive margin, 80%, 90%, depending on which niche you measure, they owned. Deere, in the meantime, is this independent maker who's very solid, very strong, but is fighting just to survive. So that goes on through 1960. 1960, Deere gets aggressive under Bill Hewitt's leadership, and by 1963 takes over the number one spot. So put that into the early 1970s, and it's fascinating. Here you've got this old legacy company that was the big dog, and they've been knocked off their perch, and they're struggling. and they're old and a little hidebound, and they've got to change. They've got new leadership. They're trying to get back towards that number one spot. And you've got Deere with Bill Hewitt at the helm, who is like, yeah, we got this in 63 and we are not going to let up. So those two companies were spending money just at an outrageous rate developing new equipment. And Budyul has a wonderful line. He says, the two biggest companies in the world were fighting it out tooth and nail, and the farmer won because
Wow.
all this new technology is coming out. So these two are doing everything they can to dominate the market. Well, IH to get back and survive, Deere to hang on to and increase kind of a stranglehold, and then the whole farm world just kind of implodes. So it's just the time is just a crucible for a lot of things. A lot of change was happening, and there's a lot of drama.
Yeah, wow. That is really cool. I actually cannot wait to read the book. It just sounds awesome. So, what was your inspiration? Why? What were the steps to go? This is the topic. This is the inspiration. What like why you decided this was it?
Well, there's a number of things. I knew I wanted drama. I wanted it to be fun to read. I wanted it to be relevant. And I felt like more modern history would be better from that. So I started looking a little more recently. Um, I also knew there is this tremendous fascination with the last days of international harvester and why they failed. And it is a big, tremendously complex puzzle. And I've spoke about it and talked about it and read about it for many years. And I knew that was something people were interested in. So I thought, well, this would be good. And then just looking for a dramatic story, I just kept coming back to Budyul because Bud was very interesting. He spoke a lot. We interviewed him. We had more than 5 hours of tape.
Wow.
When you get him on the phone, he just has story after story. And he also has spoke at a number of the enthusiast events, and many of those were recorded. So that gave me a lot of material. And then as I started looking at his material and look at the newspaper articles from the time, the other interviews we had, the intrigue, it just slowly became more and more clear that there was a really rich mine of great stories, great information, and interesting time in this capsule. And really, you know what? The moment the lightning struck the outhouse would be one of the most interesting stories Bud tells is he snuck into a John Deere introduction in 1982. And the dealer introductions, of course, they're only for the dealers. There's security at the gates. We asked the people who went them, you have to have a pass. Well, he figured a way to sneak in and actually got caught. And that story's great. And that's where the book starts, and that's where it finishes. It starts with
That's
him
awesome.
walking in the door. So yeah.
And I'm just curious, how did he get caught?
He was that's not entirely clear because he tells one story and then we published that in a part of it in a blog post. Some people from Deere came forward and they tell a slightly different story, which is
Oh,
kind of
wow.
typical
That's
with
so
Bud
cool.
stories. But he was up at the top. We know that. He claims he was there's a bar at the top of the Superdome. It was held at the Superdome in New Orleans. And he claims there's a bar up there, that there is a bar up there. Whether it was open during this, Deere in 1982 might not have wanted anybody drinking beer. I don't know. But he claims he was up there drinking beer. Our Deere person who told the story claims he was up in the rafters and they saw his reflection. So somebody saw him up there and said, "Why is this guy up here watching?" And then they did send some security people up there and haul him out. Bud likes to say they tried to handcuff him. There's all kinds of little bits of the story that may or may not be true. But he definitely was caught. He was definitely thrown out. And then the two CEOs of Deere and IH ended up talking on the phone to solve this in the end.
Wow. Oh, that is hilarious. I love it. So, what did you learn? And I remember asking you this before with Farmall Century, and it's neat because at the time you said that when you're doing this deep dive, you're learning so much as well. So, what did you take away? What did you learn while writing this book?
So much. So I think the times became clear to me in 1982. I was a sophomore in high school. My parents were teachers in farm country, and I don't know. I think a lot of high school kids live in a little bit of a bubble. So, did I know how hard those times were? I don't think I did. I've studied it. I've read about it. I've seen the numbers. I know the interest rates were so high. But going back to it, this material and going day by day, and I gathered a lot of material from the time, including pictures of farmers. So I was reading stories about what farmers were going through, seeing newspapers.com lets you look at headlines day by day, and it's incredible. It puts you very much in that time. And, the fight we went through as a country, the fight the ag industry went through, the fight farmers went through at that time, I don't think I really truly appreciated the depth of that until doing this book and going back. And that was really mixed. You see all these. I think we all know farmers are resilient. You and I were chatting about that a little bit before the opening, and seeing just how hard that time was, and seeing what people had to say and how they found ways to get through was very inspirational. It's a little scary to look at it too, but it also, that was wonderful. So that was a piece of it. And then especially for the international harvester people, some of those people that went through it, I've known for many years now because of the books, and they were telling stories. And I really came away admiring their gumption for sticking it out, and really came in home admiring Bud Ewell. I just felt like what he did. I think he had to know that his efforts to keep this company going probably weren't going to end well, but it didn't matter. He was going to fight the fight. And, on a real deep level, that was the big takeaway.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's so inspiring, and like you said, we were speaking before about the impacts of the two hurricanes that have just gone through Florida and then up through the eastern states, and it is uh, it's incredible to think about the resiliency of farmers and really in those bad times the humanity that comes out of it. And I was just I'm part of American Agri-Women, and I wrote an article just last night about the effect on farmers through this hurricane, and the positivity and the banding together to help each other are just so inspirational. And I'm sure, like you said, I was in grade school during the 80s. I don't remember any of that, but you hear the stories, and it's just they just went through so much. But again, these hard times make stronger people, right?
Yeah, they do. They do. And I also think it's universal, and it's a good to be reminded. I mean, you see these things, you're like, oh, that's a disaster, that's terrible. But disasters big and small happen to all of us, and that's part of life. Doesn't mean and so, watching people who can persevere through it, I think is just a great lesson. So yeah, yes, it's good.
Yeah, for sure. So from that, what life lessons can readers learn by reading this book?
I think I think they definitely can take away similar things that hey, when things are tough, you can step up. These people got through times that were kind of unimaginably difficult. There also is, because Bud is so colorful and so fun, there is a lot of humor throughout it. And he carries that right through the last day, and he's very colorful. The first time he sees the 2+2 tractor plays a role in this. First time he sees one, he said that's the ugliest thing God ever made. So I think a little levity is part of it as well, and a useful thing. Um,
Yeah, I love that. And I know you've said before in something I read that you wrote, I can't remember which one, but that the digital world would not have evolved without the farm tractor and this life, right? So what did you mean by that?
So what I meant by that is if you go back not that far in our history, let's say a few hundred years, we all, as a society, spent most of our time making and gathering food, right? We were agrarian country. 80 to 90% of us, again, not a few hundred years ago, were just out getting food. If you were doing that, you didn't have time to go mess around with your garage and play with printed circuit boards and create a computer, which is how, Bill Gates and others, that's where computers came into the world. So, and this is something I thought about a lot. I really, what I love about the tractor and farm mechanization is that enabled our society to have time because okay, so farming becomes mechanized, so we can eat without spending, 14 hours a day sowing potatoes. So then there's time to develop these technologies and develop all the things that make our modern world, for better or worse some days, but obviously mostly for better. So that's why I've used that line.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
here,
And it's so true.
yeah, and again, in this book, you're seeing more of that technology. I mean, the technology didn't stop advancing, so and that's another fun part of it.
Yeah.
Um, Another fun part of the book is the espionage that went on, and this is a through line just because there's so much of it and it's so entertaining. These guys, the Deere and the Harvester teams and all the farm makers pretty much were testing and using machines in similar places. And a lot of them, their headquarters are in similar places. Moline, Illinois, there's two plants back to back, or there used to be. So these guys would be using small planes to fly over test grounds, sneaking around at night, driving machines when they found them, unwrapping them from truck stops and driving them around, taking them apart, sneaking photos, doing all of this kind of small scale espionage that makes for great stories as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So when are you going to write the story about John Deere and Kinsey and their back and forths? The
That
Kinsey
would be a
story,
good
I just
one.
love it. I'm waiting for that one.
I love that as well. As does John, as you probably know if you talk to him. He loves to tell those stories. That would be
Yeah.
wonderful. John did a pretty good job of chronicling some of that in his book. He has a book about it, but yeah, John Kinzenbaugh would definitely is a book in and of himself because he certainly has yeah battled with that company quite often.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the brand loyalty has always captured me, especially in agriculture. It's we have it with our trucks too, but in agriculture, it's just so deep. And I guess that leads to my next question is this brand loyalty, especially in, Snoopy and the Spy, we're talking John Deere and International Harvester and, those fights. What role do you think brand loyalty is going to have on the farm going into the next few decades? It feels like there's less brand loyalty, but what do you think?
I don't know. I'd struggle to say there's less because the circles I travel in, I see it so much. And I spend more time probably in vintage tractor circles than on modern farms. Though there's plenty of modern farms I go and shoot at, and there's obviously plenty of people who still their blood is red or their blood is green. So
Yeah.
maybe it won't be quite as deep going forward, but it certainly hasn't gone away. I mean, I write in the book a little bit about that because the book is designed for people to read that maybe they don't know everything about tractors. They can enjoy this, and talk about the fact that themed weddings. Who has themed? Do they have Coca-Cola themed weddings? I'm not sure they do. They certainly have red and green tractor theme weddings.
Oh,
That's
yes. Yeah,
that's
that's a really good point. I've never thought about that. I've seen hundreds of wedding pictures with their tractors, but you're right. Who has like the bottle of Coke or yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that. And my marketing brain never went there. So thank you for that.
You bet. You bet. They are incredible. By the way, since we're talking this, I've got something fun we haven't even released. I can show you. This is the first time this has been seen. So this has can you see this all right?
Yes.
Okay, it has a red tractor there on the cover, right? If you open it up,
Oh, wow. Hold it up a little bit more. There we go.
you
Oh,
you can turn it around, which I won't do because it's a little awkward. And then you don't have to have the book on your table with a red cover. You can have a green tractor.
oh my gosh. That is the coolest thing ever.
Isn't that
I
fun?
love it.
Our production editor found a book that had a double-sided jacket, is what it's called. And she was like, "We're going to use this on something." I'm like, "Here we go." So,
Oh, that is so great because really, a green farm wants to have a red tractor on the coffee table. They'll never do
no,
that. They
no,
don't, and you don't want your book hidden. So
no,
so
right, right.
brilliant.
This way
I love it.
they can read it in public without shame. Yes.
Yes. Oh, that's great. I love it. I guess my last question then for you is, you're such a great storyteller. You have so much interest, so much history, so much knowledge. But where does this passion come from? Why are you so passionate about the agriculture industry and history?
Oh boy, I'll give you as short as I can. First, my passion for storytelling comes from way back. The two things I loved as a kid were anything with a motor and wheels and books. So I read the entire science fiction library I was in a little town called Rice Lake that had a pretty good library. I read every book on the shelf. So
Wow.
I'm an avid reader, and from a very young age, I wanted to write. So that's what I've studied through college, through everything. In college, I was going to be a science writer. I tried to be an engineer for a while, realized that was a bad thing, and I thought I'll be a science writer. And my interests as a kid were motorcycles and cars. I wanted to go fast. And I still race bicycles to this day. I like that. So, but tractors were just something I used and knew it wasn't something I had that passion for. But right after college, a local book publisher saw some of my work I was doing at the publications at the University of Minnesota and said, "Hey, we think a good science writer like you could write a book." And I'm sure they were thinking, "And you're a kid, so you're probably cheap and we can afford you." But, as a 25-year-old young man, yes, of course I'm going to write a book. And the first thing they gave me was Farm All Tractors. It was a small book on that. And I went out and I started in fact, before I took the assignment, I did a photo shoot and I went to a local tractor show and just took some pictures, took my camera, kind of screwed around. And I was real close to this old farm all taking a picture, and the smell reminded me so much of my grandfather. And my grandfather was a farmer. My dad's not a gearhead. He was a baseball player, but my grandfather was. So grandpa and I bonded over machinery. And that was a real powerful moment. Then once I studied, and we touched on this, once I started to understand what ag equipment did for our society, how important these machines are. A motorcycle is great. It's fun. It's sexy. It's neat. It is transportation in parts of the world, but it didn't change our society in a fundamental way like a farm tractor did. So I love that. I also I was an outdoor photographer in the early days, travel photographer, and photographing these is mostly outside. You're capturing the light and the setting. It's very, farms are beautiful. It's very similar. I love that. And I also just love tractor collectors. They are, and farmers. They're my people. That's where I grew up. And they're also, a tractor collector. Sometimes car collectors can be a little too worried about their machine, and tractor collectors are just really loose and really fun. So the whole thing just sort of came together and became this thing that I just adore learning about and talking about. So
I love it. Yeah, great answer. Well, thank you so much for joining me again. Thank you for telling me about the book, and I can't wait to get my hands on it and read it. It's going to be great. I know it.
wonderful. Thanks so much for having me on, Chrissy. It's always a great conversation.
And thanks to all who are watching or listening. If you want to learn more, the link to the book is in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to North American Ag Spotlight on Rumble, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Amazon, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you like the episode, I would love it if you shared it.